Hello, New Mexico. My name is Daniel Chacón, and I'm the state government reporter for the Santa Fe New Mexican. If you've tuned in before, you know this is an episode of Around the Roundhouse, a podcast featuring the policies, politics, and personalities of the beautiful state of New Mexico. In this week's episode, we're taking a look at the race for state land commissioner. All three candidates who have formally announced their intentions to seek the office are Democrats. They're also all men. The three are hoping to succeed Stephanie Garcia Richard, who is term limited and running for lieutenant governor. The first out of the gate was a Democratic Party leader who served as U.S. Senator Martin Heinrich's political director and deputy campaign manager. The second contender is a former Biden appointee. This week, State Representative Matthew McQueen announced his intention to seek the office. Representative McQueen has served 6 terms in the legislature and has championed various bills that have become law and will factor into the race, including a ban on traps, snares, and poisons on public land and increasing oil and gas royalty rates on premium parcels of state land. Representative McQueen, thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you, Daniel. Good to be here.
Representative, I gotta be totally honest with you. Every time that I think about you, or even when I'm gonna write your name, the name Steve McQueen comes to my mind. And I'm wondering, am I the only one that happens to? Has that have you heard that before?
That's been the pattern my entire life. I'm a little surprised it happens to you because I think of you as a younger gentleman, and you got to be of a certain age to be thinking about Steve McQueen. And some people call me Steve, and they don't even notice, and they don't know why. It's just like hardwired somewhere in the back of your brain.
Are you a fan of Steve McQueen?
He was the king of cool, right? I mean, how can you not be a fan of Steve McQueen?
All right. Representative, as I mentioned, there are 2 others running in the race for state land commissioner. Both of them are 34 years old. You are 58 years old. Your opponents, so far anyway, are also both Hispanic. And I'm wondering, does that work in your favor or does that work against you?
You know, I don't believe my race is going to work in my favor. Not in a state like New Mexico, not in a Democratic primary. The age thing, you and I talked about that a little when I first announced. To me, it's not that I'm 25 years older than these guys. It's that I have 25 years more experience than they do.
As I also mentioned earlier, there aren't any women running in the race. My colleague, Mylan Simonich, had a really interesting column just a few days ago talking about how he kind of mentioned the list of possible contenders with Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver at the top of the list as a possible contender. Do you think that Maggie could take you and the other guys out?
So, it was an interesting column. I think there was a big caveat in his column, and he was basically saying a qualified woman could shake up the race. And that's the key, a qualified woman. And I'm a big believer in qualified candidates being able to win. That's why I'm running. That's how I think I'm going to win. So if there was a qualified woman in the race, yeah, that would shake up the race. I still think they're going to have a hard time matching my qualifications, but it is an open primary.
Representative, if I'm not mistaken, and I think we spoke about this last time around, is that this will be your first statewide race. So what are you doing to prepare? I mean, are you going to have to, what does fundraising look like? Are you going to be traveling the state?
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to be everywhere in the state. It's a big state. Fortunately, it's a beautiful state, and I don't mind driving. So I'm willing to meet with people that are interested in this race wherever I may find them.
Given that it is your first statewide race, is it a different strategy this time around?
It is a different strategy. It's a bigger budget, more fundraising, different outreach. I've been representing House District 50. I'm in my 11th year, my 6th term. And I know the communities in my district really well. Even though my district changed substantially in the last redistricting, I work hard to represent those people. I have to expand that mindset. I have to get out. I have to meet people who may not know who I am.
Okay. We mentioned earlier a little bit about your education and work and legislative experience, which I actually spent some time reviewing. Tell us about your BA and master's degrees and where you've worked and how that relates to the job of state land commissioner.
So I've been working in land in conservation pretty much my entire life. I went to a little college back east. I majored in political science and environmental studies. These are things I care about. I went to law school and grad school in the Midwest. I got a law degree and a master's of science and natural resources policy. And when I was going to law schools, there were 3 law schools that had these combined degree programs. It was Yale, Duke, and the University of Michigan. And I ended up at the University of Michigan, partly so I could do that extra program. And then later in life, I went to business school at UNM as well. So I'm someone who enjoys learning new things, but all of it sort of comes back to working with land, either professionally as an attorney or focusing on conservation and conservation matters, natural resource matters in the legislature.
Tell us a little bit more about your practice of law. What, for folks that might want to get a better understanding of what do you do?
I graduated from law school over 30 years ago, and I've had a number of different jobs. I've worked for big firms, I've worked for small firms, I've worked for the state of New Mexico. I was an attorney at the Interstate Stream Commission, so I have that perspective as well. I currently work by myself, for myself. My practice is all what I call transactional. I do real property work, I do contracts, I do title review, I do deeds. I don't do any litigation, I don't do any family law, I don't do any criminal law, anything like that. I work with land.
Representative, did you set out to be an attorney when you were a little kid? I mean, what did you want to be when you wanted to be when you were young?
When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a park ranger. I liked the big hats. I thought those were awesome. And then I went to college, and in college, I was thinking about, I think being a park ranger would be a great calling, a great career. I wanted to make an impact, and I thought about how I was going to make an impact. And I decided that becoming a lawyer was a way that I could make a bigger impact with my work.
And sir, what brought you to New Mexico?
So I grew up in California. I went to college back east, went to law school in the Midwest. I'll tell you, in the East and the West, I missed the sunshine of Southern California. I also didn't want to live in Los Angeles, quite frankly. So I was really deliberate about it, and I actually got out weather statistics, and I looked around, and I traveled around the Southwest, and New Mexico and Santa Fe in particular had everything I wanted, right? It had the climate I wanted, it had the sunshine I wanted, it had the cultural and outdoor and recreation opportunities I wanted. And, I personally sort of drift towards small towns. I like a rural feeling. Santa Fe was like the biggest small town I could find. Like it had legal opportunities. Like there were law firms where I could send a resume and say, I'm available. Why don't you hire me? If you get much smaller than Santa Fe, that becomes a challenge.
And sir, a question that you will hear between now and at least the Democratic primary in June of 2026. Why did you decide to run for state land commissioner?
We talked about this as well. To me, it's public service. I have been doing public service my entire adult life. Before I was in the legislature, I was very active in my community. I was very active in conservation matters. I was on the water board. I was on the River Commission. I was on the BLM Resource Advisory Council. These were things I cared about. And at one point, one of my predecessors, Rhonda King, representative for District 50, announced she was going to retire. And I started talking to my friends saying, well, who's going to run? And my interest was literally, I wanted to know who I was going to be working with. And people said to me, well, why don't you run? And I thought about that, and I thought, well, yeah, I have the skills, I have the tools to do that. So A couple of years later, I didn't run immediately, but a couple of years later, I ran. I got elected, and I've been continuing to do this work and continuing to develop the knowledge, the capabilities, the relationships to do this work. And when I think about the land office and what the land office does, it's a natural evolution. I'm a great fit for that job. I think I can really help the land office continue the good work that they're doing.
For folks who may not know what the land office or the Commissioner of Public Land or State Lands does, what is the State Land Office? What are the responsibilities of that office?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are unclear on what they do, and it's not the BLM, it's not the Forest Service, it's not one of these federal agencies, it's not even a recreational agency for the most part. The number one job of the land office is to earn money for education, and they do a wonderful job at that. There's the Land Grant Permanent Fund that is, I think it's the second largest sovereign wealth fund in the nation. It stands at about $30 billion. And because of their efforts to raise money for New Mexico, they save every family in New Mexico about $3,000 a year. Money that's going to education, money that's going to schools, universities, and hospitals. They own 9 million surface acres of the state of New Mexico and 13 million mineral estate acres, and they earn money for education.
Tell us your thoughts on the job performance of the current office holder, Stephanie Garcia Richard, and whether she's had a little bit of luck given the boom in the oil and gas industry in New Mexico.
I think Stephanie is doing a great job. And I'll tell you, the thing she probably did best of all was she hired great people. She has a great team at the land office. That's something I've talked to and worked with a number of the staff people to the best I can. I would like to keep that team intact. If Stephanie runs for lieutenant governor, if she wins her lieutenant governor race, that office has a relatively small staff, so she can't take all of her key people with her. And I'm hoping they stay on. So I think she's done an excellent job, and I want to build on the foundation that she's set.
Would you bring any new initiatives to the State Land Office if you were to be elected and win that office?
I want to, we always talk about diversifying our economy, and same with the land office, right? 97% of their income is coming from oil and gas. And we desperately need to develop other sources of income. I'm not the first one to figure that out. Stephanie's been working on that. Jim Baca, Ray Powell before her, other land commissioners have worked on it. But it takes some time, and I've been thinking about it. The mineral leases they do, they're actually set out in statute. They're pretty straightforward. It's pretty much, similar transaction each time you do that. But if you're doing a commercial transaction or you're doing a housing transaction, it's a lot different. Like each piece of property is unique. Each transaction is unique. And that's why I say they need continuity and capacity. They need the continuity to keep working on those deals and develop those deals, and the capacity to do them. You can't ask a small staff to ramp up the work. You need more people to do if you want to do more deals.
Representative, earlier I mentioned some of the pieces of legislation that you've worked on. Are there any others that stand out that kind of tie to the work at the land office?
Yeah, so the royalty rate was a big one. I did a lot of work reforming our Department of Fish and Game, which will become our Department of Wildlife, and looking at, how that agency is staffed, how that agency is funded, what that agency's mission is. So working on that from sort of an agency point of view. And I've also done a lot of work on oil and gas reform. And not all of my bills have passed, but like working on making sure we have sufficient bonding, so we don't get stuck with orphaned and abandoned wells. Making sure oil and gas companies play by the rules that we set. We are very appreciative of what the oil and gas industry does for New Mexico. I mean, that the income we receive from the oil and gas industry makes a lot of what we do possible. That being said, we want them to be good actors. So one bill, I had a bill to restore the ability of the Oil Conservation Division, OCD, to impose fines and penalties on bad actors. And that bill wasn't really moving. So we attached that to the produced water bill. And the produced water bill was something they wanted. And so we made it clear, if you get this thing that you want, you're also going to give us this thing we want. And through that amendment, we restored the ability to levy fines and penalties on bad actors.
Representative, another piece of legislation that you're known for and is kind of directly or maybe indirectly tied to the state land office is a proposed constitutional amendment to end the practice of pocket vetoes by the governor. Why did you fight so hard for that proposal?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, if you want something to pass the legislature, you got to fight hard. Pretty much anything, right? I mean, it's hard to pass legislation. That to me is a transparency proposal. And it'll be on the ballot in November 2026. I would encourage everyone to vote for that. It doesn't limit the governor's ability to veto a bill. That's the executive prerogative. That's in the Constitution. All it says is tell us why. And we have a situation right now where if you send a bill up before the final 3 days of the session, the governor has to give you a message. They have to act before the expiration of the session, and they have to tell you what they're doing. But after the legislature adjourns, the governor has 20 or 30 days to sign bills or not. And if they don't sign the bill, it simply doesn't become law. And that's what they call a pocket veto. And, the current governor, I think this year she pocket vetoed 17 bills. That's not a small number. And when you have a bill pocket vetoed, and I've had bills pocket vetoed, and I had a bill pocket vetoed this year, it's hard to know what to do next. So I had a bill dealing with free roaming horses, and it provided for fertility control and adoption and relocation to approved horse sanctuaries, and it outlawed the slaughter of these horses. And these are all good things, I think. And that bill was vetoed, pocket vetoed. So I don't know why. So when I go back to try that bill again, I need the governor to tell me what she objected to so I can address those concerns.
And you mentioned it was a transparency push for you, but was it that you had been pocket vetoed at some point that really motivated you to pursue this proposal?
Certainly getting pocket vetoed focuses your attention on the issue. I've been pocket vetoed at least 3 times that I can think of by 2 different governors. And all I'm saying is tell us why.
Okay. As you mentioned, that proposal will go before voters in November 2026. If you are fortunate enough to receive or win the Democratic nomination, you will be on the ballot at the same time. Are you planning to run 2 campaigns, or is that one going to kind of you're going to let it go where it goes?
I think, I hope some of the public interest groups like Common Cause, maybe the League of Women Voters, New Mexico Foundation for Open Government, that they get behind that bill and they help educate the public about that. It's just sort of common sense to me. I think it passed the legislature. If it wasn't unanimous, it was darn close. So there's a lot of support behind that bill. I'm very optimistic for it passing in November of 26.
All right. I don't want to put you on the spot, Representative, but I was looking at your I was looking at your financial disclosure report, and you had mentioned that you've done work for state agencies, but that report shows that you've provided services to the New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department over $5,000 during the prior calendar year. Can you just kind of explain what that's about?
Sure. I represent the valuation protest boards. So when you protest your property taxes, you file a protest with your assessor. And if you can't resolve it with the assessor, you have a right to a hearing. And the hearing is before a 3-member board. And I serve as an advisor and counsel to those boards in different counties throughout New Mexico.
Okay, thank you for that explanation, sir. I also wanted to ask, you've got 2 young children. I'm sure you consulted with your wife, but did you consult with your kids about running for statewide office?
Consult's probably not the right word. When I started thinking about this, of course, the first person I talked to was my wife, and she's on board. And I actually talked to my kids about it shortly before the announcement. And I told them it's going to be a lot of hard work, and I'm going to be gone a lot because I'm going to be all over the state. And so for the next year and a half, I'm not going to be around as much, and it sort of breaks my heart. But then after that, if I win, I have a good job. I live close to Santa Fe, and I'm not going to miss a soccer game again.
Right on. Well, Representative, you've been super generous with your time, especially on this holiday week. Am I missing to ask you anything you want to add about the race for state land commissioner?
So I'll say, and we've touched on this, but I believe in public service, and I believe in New Mexico, and I'm a worker, and I think there's work to be done. And I know I'm a politician. I mean, I admit to that. But it's not my natural self. I just want to get to work and do the work. And I have to do the campaigning and the fundraising and all that in order to be able to do the work. So, my message to the voters is let's get to work.
All right. Well, Representative, thank you so much for spending time with us. And thank you to our viewers and listeners for tuning in to Around the Roundhouse. Join us every week as we talk to newsmakers in the political realm by subscribing to our podcast through Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. For the latest developments about New Mexico news, go to SantaFeNewMexican.com, where you can also subscribe to our political newsletter, The Roundhouse Report. Until next time, I'm Daniel Chacón, and this has been Around the Roundhouse.